Welcome to Power Up, the podcast that uncovers the unique challenges women leaders face today. Join your hosts, Nat and Kristen, as we dive into the tough topics and provide actionable insights you can apply right now. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. How are you today, Nat?
I think this is a good time to talk about this topic because I've been on 4 trips in the last 2 weeks. I have not been at home. And as a result of that, there's this very real sense in my brain of everything feeling up in the air, balls being dropped. It's just sense of there's not enough time to get done what I want to get done.
Yeah,
Yeah. How about you?
busy.
Are you busy?
I had to say it because that's what we're chatting about today is like, are we actually busier or do we think we are? Like, what is broken? So yeah, I love that we're chatting about busyness and being busy. And I was kind of doing a little bit of reading, and it turns out that we actually have more leisure time than our parents did and more leisure time than their parents did. So what gives?
Yeah, well, it's actually I was thinking about this because I think about my parents, and we were out with Kyla's parents in the weekend, and Kyla's parents have always owned motels, so they work 7 days a week. And but their type of work is very different. Like knowledge workers sit at a desk and you have to really go deep into something. You're problem solving, you are doing large pieces of work. And whereas always on workers who are doing jobs where it's like someone might check in at this time or you have to do the cleaning, it's more defined almost. So like they're two very different approaches to work, both of which we would talk about as busy, but I think the busyness feels very different. Like, I think Kyla's parents probably feel like they can't get away well, they can now, they've just sold. They couldn't get away from their motel. That it didn't matter what day it was, you still had to do cleaning, you still had to do this stuff. Whereas I think often knowledge workers, there's just this mental burden of, like, there's so much to do, and it's often undefined, or there's a lot of unknowns, or there's lots of different things that kind of we haven't planned out properly, and eh, there's lots of dependencies and meetings, and so it just feels like this intense burden.
I love that. And complexity feels as though it's probably increased, but also the always on thing. I know that for most of us, we'll have our work apps or emails on our phone. So even when we're not working, the fact that we can be reached, or I will refresh my inbox, for example, to see what's coming in, there's a blurred line between working and not working that or lack thereof nowadays that there always was. And when you were talking about that, I was thinking about Kyle's dad, who used to work in a factory and raise the kids working in a factory, but also driving a taxi. And when you think about those two types of work, he would have had a very repetitive work day, and he would know what was expected, and he would rock in and he would do his factory work. And the same thing with the taxi. It was just like have a conversation with the people, get them to where they need to go, rinse and repeat. And when he was done his workday, he was done his workday. And that is not often the case for us. But you're right in terms of the increasing complexity. So
Well,
that's
and maybe
interesting.
it could be like that. Like, I think that's what I want to explore in this episode is like, why have we decided that we can't have that? Because like the this we almost seem to have this artificial expectation that work ends, and it's like it's never going to end. That's why we still have jobs. Like maybe the robots will take it over, but work doesn't tidily finish at the end of every workday. So it's kind of on us to tidily finish it in our brains and move on, because I like the stat you found that I've heard a lot, and it totally makes sense that since the 1960s, Americans now work 8 hours less a week, and their leisure time has increased by 7 hours a week. So we're actually working less. And on top of that, I would say the convenience of technology has led us to have washing machines and ovens and microwaves and all these things that
That
actually
was
take.
That was another step, by the way, of women's housework. The amount of hours it used to take them to do the housework versus what it takes us now. Classic, like, obviously, gender division there, but, that's also dropped immensely because of the things you talked about. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're
Yeah.
actually doing a lot less, but we're filling our brains with the sense of busyness more. And I think everyone kind of does understand that we both have this really strong thing around canceling, but also around busyness culture. And so I think today is another great opportunity to sort of tackle that mindset and challenge all of us to think a little bit differently about what we take on, what we don't take on, and how we let the mental burden trick us into thinking there's an actual busyness burden.
I would love to deep dive on a single case study, but just use it to guide our conversation because I thought this was a really interesting study that we could expand and relate to a bunch of scenarios, including ones, organizations and cultures we've been in. Because after reading the study, I was like, oh, granted, the problem is us, but actually it is also them, and I think that's important to actually for leaders that are listening, for people that can influence company culture, and hopefully everyone feels as though they have a voice in their organizations, but I think that actually it, comes down to them as well, and we'll get to that a little bit, but, I read this research called and it was a researcher who coined this phenomenon called the time famine phenomenon. And she said that it's our emotional experiences that influence our perception of time. So if we feel passion, excitement, contentment, curiosity, we get into the flow. And actually, do you know, I bet you that Kyle's dad got into the flow because he would have just been doing the same thing, repetitive work, and he would have been daydreaming or thinking about something and probably would have been in some form of flow. However, when we're stressed, anxious, feel pressure, or feel pressure, even when it's not, time feels scarce. So that's quite interesting, this flipped phenomenon. And she studied engineers. So I thought I'll just pause here, but I thought we could go into the 3 of these major findings that she found that I think are pretty relatable.
That totally makes sense to me because when you're on holiday, do you find that like you're so at the first week always goes or the first couple of days always go really slowly? I think because the other factor that leads into that is change makes us feel makes time slow down. So if you are doing the same thing all the time, time speeds up, which is why throughout normal adult week where you have the same routine, it's just like, where did another year go? I feel like I've been seeing that for the last couple of months now. How are we already at the end of the year? It's because there's not much change in our day-to-day lives. It's the same home, it's the same work, it's the whereas as soon as you change and go on holiday, suddenly time slows down for a bit because it's a big change. And then the more you adapt to being on holiday, it speeds up, which is why it always feels so hard at the end that it just finishes really quickly.
I never thought about it. I love it. But, you've also talked about Obama a little bit last week when we were talking about busy, like, what was I loved, like,
It's
your
a
take.
reminder I give to myself. I have a couple of mantras, and Obama is one of them. And the reason I use it is because sometimes I fall into this trap. I don't think I'm alone in this, where you just kind of get a bit whiny and it just feels like I've got so much on and I'm so busy. And I look at my calendar and every 15 minutes is blocked, but it's also overlapped by other 15 minutes. And it's like, how am I going to get it all done? And then I just remind myself that Obama successfully ran the free world. And I mean, ran the free world. Like, really did do some stuff and use his time, and he managed to do that in the same time that I have in a day. So I feel like it's a nice reminder to me and I just plucked Obama. There's a ton of other people you could pick too as your person, but it's a really nice reminder sometimes of when you feel like, "Oh, I'm so unique and I'm such a snowflake and I personally can't possibly get out of this busy trap because I'm so important," to realize that there's these really big roles and they managed to do it. And if they can do it, we can do it.
We can
Granted,
and
we
I know,
still
and
got advisors and helpers and all of that sort of stuff, but it's still huge work, so
Yeah, no kidding, no kidding. That was a big job. And the reason I thought about it was because this researcher, her name is Leslie Perlow, and she went in and embedded herself in a team of engineers. I think it was about 9 engineers for 9 months. She embedded herself. Imagine that, just having someone watching every single thing you do. And what she found when I thought of your Obama quote was she found that these engineers felt constantly overwhelmed despite having the same 24 hours as everyone else. And you wouldn't put a straight measure of going everyone feels overwhelmed. So that's kind of what when she released these findings, she was like, "Here are some real cues as to why this particular team and many teams, have this feeling of overwhelm." Um,
So was
shall
she
I just
saying every
Yeah.
single person in the team felt overwhelmed? Yeah, I actually that's, it'll be interesting to dig into this, I haven't looked into this, but I feel like there's some obvious factors because it's true, it's often I was actually thinking we went to Matakana last week, and if you are not from New Zealand, it is just this gorgeous little seaside village, and it's full of amazing, I don't know, wineries and houses and a cute little village, and we were visiting an incredible startup founder, and she is Obama for me. Like, she is someone who just sort of seems to be cool, calm, and collected. She's got the same amount of work on as us, potentially even more, but she seems to just have this aura of like, it's all under control. And I took away a lot from that around prioritization as well. And like, she even told us they have just done another round of prioritization where they're like, if this doesn't directly link to sales, we're cutting it. And I just thought, oh yeah, how much time did we spend in the last 2 weeks doing stuff that really didn't move the needle? And granted, it's an experiment, but it's so easy to create an internal culture of how work works.
Well, that's why I love starting it with, like, it's not just you, it's them, and then, of course, how can we take control of influencing them and therefore us, and I love that. So, first of all, she found that the culture of this organization was key, and the first finding was that a crisis mentality plus a reward system was based on individual heroics. This is super capitalism, eh? And no doubt Silicon Valley and this culture is bled into it, like, the biggest companies in the world. Amazon, whatever, like, will be very much like this. And so everything was treated as urgent. The person who saved the day got praised, and what saved the day looked like were people who worked long hours, not necessarily people who worked the smartest. They were available for every interruption because that meant being a team player. And so as a result, there was this like crisis mentality of everything's on fire. And then they rewarded people who stayed late, pulled all nighters, were open to every single interruption because that was collaboration. And that was her first finding, was in the reward system, and the expectations of what good looked like were frankly nuts.
I think it's obvious that those 2 are correlated. I'm not sold that Amazon would work like that though, but it'd be interesting to know. I think
True,
this is something
yeah.
that I've
Would be
noticed more
interesting.
and more post-COVID because, yeah, I think it's a really low performance culture, and I think post-COVID is because we went through this patch where we all had to react. Like lots of massive change happened really quickly. We got into reactive mode and we've actually never gotten back out of that mode. So that concept of crisis mentality is baked into this idea of if it's not an emergency, it's not worth doing. And to get out of that, we have to stop and start to forward plan, which is actually incredibly hard. And it's much easier to wait till everything is a crisis and then react. And I love that correlation because the concept of like it's almost like a superhero complex, isn't it? It's like if we don't ever plan and don't think forward about how we might intentionally do stuff, and we reward people for like jumping in when everything's chaotic, of course, that's like it just creates this terrifying cycle.
Yeah. No, you know what? I'm actually gonna underline that it is a problem at Amazon because, it's actually a problem at big tech, as supported by, employees who are dying, and there was one on the weekend, an engineer who died at Microsoft from overwork, and so I think there is a culture created in those environments of what work looks like, and we know Elon Musk does it, no doubt Jeff Bezos does, and I'm just scrolling some stats, and, lots of concerns over, mental health, suicide, and death from overwork, which is, yeah, not good, not good. So, yeah, and when they're kind of the most popular, sought after, um, prestigious companies to work for, like, if you have those companies on your CV, you're like, that's gold, right? As we accept in this world today, and I think that that is a culture that has very much been normalized, is this heroic, first of all, everything's urgent, everything has to be done now. Granted, they'd be hyper competitive and competing to get product out and be on top of everything, but yeah, reward system feels really interesting. I think that was
I
her
think
first
that's
finding.
yeah, I
Mm,
feel like that's an interesting self-leadership lesson there as well, because most of those brands are, like you say, hyper competitive and there's a real status at working for them. And I think it's something we really need to challenge is if you don't wanna work like that, you don't have to work at those organizations. Like, we almost have to get a little bit more comfortable. Like, if you are working yourself to death, that is not good because the reality is we are all very different. We all have different circumstances. And clearly, some of these cultures are designed by people like Elon Musk who has that level of capacity for work. Granted, huge sacrifices in other parts of his life, but that's the culture he wants. That's the culture of people he has. If that's not for you, don't work there. Don't work
Well, and
there.
that's also I mean, that feel like that's a whole other podcast of what success is, isn't it? Like, that feels like a really interesting chat to have. Okay, let's chat about her second finding, which we no doubt, will relate to or have seen and experienced, and this is that her second finding that related to this whole, time is scarce phenomenon and time famine, I just don't have enough time, was that constant interruptions and context switching were so Cree. So we're always around, and it created an illusion of being busy. So this is what she would observe. She would go, people would always come to the engineers, like they would for many people, of course, and they would go, "Can I just take a minute of your time and help me nut out this problem, or can you help me with my IT issue?" And then they would stop what they were doing, and they would help the person. I don't know, that would take a few minutes, and then it would take them 20 minutes to get back in and refocus. But there were like 9 interruptions per hour or something like that. And so because they were constantly doing work, they felt busy because they were helping with work or collaborating, again, back to the reward system, but they didn't get their work done and or worked crazy hours to get their work done because of this constant interruption and context switching culture.
I saw, actually the co-founder I was talking about, the founder from last week, her co-founder posted on LinkedIn last week saying, "Busyness leads to inefficiency." And I really loved that. He had put it in a much better way, but I really loved it because that's this, is we accidentally equate busyness with performance, but it's actually the exact opposite. The busier you are, probably the less effective you're being because you're just stuck in the cycle. And it's kind of like with this, like you're not being intentional about your priorities. You're not thinking through what you should be working on, what you should say no to. You're not sending clear boundaries about how to be communicated with and when you do what. Other people are controlling your calendar and your time. And it leads to this culture, you're right, of feeling drained at the end of the day. And I've seen a lot of people in this boat in the last couple of years that they get to the end of the week and they go, I felt like I worked like a maniac, but I actually don't know what I achieved. And that is, again, I think it's sort of really correlated with point one of this kind of, we're in reactive mode all the time. So I'm interrupting you, we're waiting till an emergency. There's no like, we're just stopping and we're planning what's useful to spend our time on.
Mm, and even just the interruption thing's quite interesting. I know that we can give many are back in the office nowadays, and so cues that we can give are, headphones, for example. That was an obvious cue of "Don't interrupt me." We talk a lot about calendar blocking and, deep work time. I happen to be working on, I don't know, whatever, this board paper or whatever, really naming that focus time in calendars, turning all notifications off because we sometimes are our own worst enemy in terms of constantly checking our phones 100 times an hour, or whatever obscene amount of what it is. I think it's 120. Um, and or every ding and bell and whatever. So I think there's some things that we can do. It is tricky for those that need something, and of course, like Teams and Slack, using those appropriately. Like, but yeah, this whole asynchronous thing is kind of interesting. Eh? Like, do you want to chat through that?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's intentional, right? Like, I think this
Mm,
is where organizations have gone awry with the back to work movement of like, we can't work remotely. And it's like, no, you can't. If you don't plan for it, absolutely, it will be chaotic. But if we start thinking about how work can happen effectively, you create different, I don't know, rituals, ways of working that make it work. So, like, there's some really simple tools, even like with a red light system. One of the things, or traffic light system, one of the things we all do is I go, oh, this is top of mind for me right now. I need, for example, Kristen to help me overcome this or answer this question. Drop everything, call Kristen, get my answer. If I actually used a traffic light system, I'd go, actually, I could probably put this on my work tomorrow, email her now or message her now. When she has a minute, she can get back to me. No harm, no foul. I haven't blown up workday with my non-urgent need.
Yeah,
So
true.
I think, yeah, with everything asynchronous work is sort of about recognizing there is a difference in urgency. And that's why there's lots of rituals like stand ups and end of day diaries and how protocols for using Slack and when do you have a meeting and when do you not, and identifying blockers at the end of every day. All of that sort of stuff really helps go, how are we making sure work is flowing through without stopping and just defaulting to our instinct, which is, this is top of mind for me. I'll just interrupt the person closest to me and get it sorted, and not thinking through the impacts on their workday.
Yeah, that feels to me like it's culture, which then, it defines process, and so to me, that feels, like, really deliberate about how we work, which is culture, and, to underline that, it feels like her 3rd finding is really just that, that the company culture literally rewarded the wrong behaviors, so, things like, that she called it hero worship, like, the one that pulled the all-nighter to get it done, got the promotion, always being on meant that you were collaborative. So if you answered that 9 p.m. phone call or on holiday, and hours equal dedication. And so people that were always in the office got promoted. Hence the real gender imbalance that we see, because that's simply, and when you talk to women who value different cultures of organizations, flexibility always comes up top. So yeah, no wonder that there's such an issue in these organizations that have, frankly, not very great culture.
Yeah, but also I think about those, all 3 of those points, and, like, when you talk about us and them, I suppose, like, take leadership out of it, I think our brains often operate like that, like, we've often said, like, point 1, the crisis mentality. We often find this even with PowerSuit. People, may sign up to a membership, and then they don't turn up for the first couple of sessions, and Kristen, you will call them, and they'll pick up and go, "Oh, I've just been really busy," and we're always, like, kind of like, it's sort of baffling because you're like, but you picked up this call, so you could do it when there was a hard deadline and someone immediately accountable, but you won't do it if it's just you having to self lead that. And I think there's something that we've all created internally in our brains of, we need accountability, we need a deadline in order to get things done. And if we do want to move back into a proactive growth era, the way to do that is to stop relying on those triggers and actually build your own triggers and say, I am going to block this time and do it. And I think it's same with context switching, time blocking in your calendar, interruptions, teaching people how to treat you, and not assuming that doing a million things a day equates to performance. Like, it's almost like we all have to change our mindsets on these things and recognize that that sense of weight we feel from busyness is often actually just us having poor habits and worry.
100%, and I have to plug PowerSuit, like, for, $500 a year, 504, it to me, it feels like a no-brainer, anyone who resonates with this, because I'll tell you why, because a few things have
Tell
come
us
up in
why,
this.
Kristen.
Yeah,
Tell us
I'm gonna
why.
tell you why, because, well, number 1, when I read through her stuff, everything framed as a crisis is exactly why we say yes to everything, and we are unable to say no because we assume everything's a crisis. So when we're asked to do something, everything drops and we get in a pickle. So we've got a mini masterclass on how to say no. And the other no involved in that is FOMO. Like, when we're asked to attend things or go to things or do things, we say again, yes to everything without stopping, because we want to be included, or I'll miss something important if I'm not there. And so we have a whole mini masterclass on no and how to actually counter some of that stuff with the actual words to use to say no. But we also have a mini masterclass just sitting in there ready to be watched. 19 minutes on how to say a strategic yes. Like, what are the things we should say yes to as well? And both of those turn into a mindset shift. So it just was silly for me not to push, like, we've got the solution actually.
I
Just
I
saying.
think that it's true.
Mm.
It is that intentionality thing, because I was even thinking, on top of that, we work less than we used to. What there's some crazy stat as well about how working mums spend like X% more time with their children now than stay-at-home mums did, a couple of decades ago. And we
Because
just
they
put.
were wringing the laundry with their hands.
Yeah, but also they were just like, "Not my job." Like, it's not my job to be your one-stop shop to set you up for life. That's your job. Like, parenting philosophy has changed, and I think it's all under the same banner of, like, we work so hard, and if I'm busy all the time and I invest every ounce of my being in everything I do, that will lead to success. And actually, what we're finding, I mean, the evidence is all around us, is it actually just leads to burnout and not really achieving a lot else. So I think it is time that we actually get really thoughtful about, okay, we've tried this philosophy, didn't really work that well. How do we start to really banish this weight? I keep feeling it as a weight because I've been really paying attention to it over the last couple of weeks when we've been talking about this, to go, I'm not doing anything more. Like, I'm literally no more productive than I usually am, but I feel busier because I've got this weight of all the things that I feel like I should be doing on my brain.
Totally. Do you know what was just interesting? My last point was I feel as though process and culture got so much better during the COVID crisis because we had to scrap all the meaningless meetings that happened. They immediately got scrapped. We got really clear on decision making and who makes the decision. We got clear on what success looked like and the work that didn't need to be done. And like it's almost like all that noise went away because we had to focus firstly on the important stuff that could not be dropped. It almost galvanized priority. But the second thing is that we really focused on well being because we were going through a huge health crisis. And it's just so interesting that we, in a way, had this beautiful reset. And I'm not suggesting it didn't make some things good or bad or whatever, but to me, it felt like there was this great reset. And I suppose what we're challenging is like, how can we reset? Because to get back to some of the time where it was like, is this urgent? Is this important? Does this move the needle? Who's making the decision? Is this meeting necessary? It just felt like an interesting reset. That's all.
Yeah, and I think it is some of those bad habits. Like, it's that like, I think we've talked about a few of them. The other one I call people out on now is the number of people I know who go, I might have to work this weekend. And they tell me 10 times, I might need to work this weekend. Oh, I'm stressed out. I might need to work this weekend. They don't actually work that weekend, but they've spent the whole week wasting so much energy worrying about maybe having to work in the weekend, that I'm like, you have convinced yourself now you're so busy. You actually didn't do anything. You just worried about maybe having to do something. And I think that kind of, to me, summarizes this whole thing. It's like my feeling at the moment of like, I'm not actually doing anything more, but I can see a busy calendar and I feel stressed about it. And
I love that.
yeah,
Yeah, that is literally this time famine phenomenon that like when we are excited, we're content, we're curious, time is like we're in the flow. And when we're anxious or stressed, time, the perception of time completely slips where people is like, there is no end to this because I feel like you unsettled or moving around or not grounded or my plate is really full the next 5 days. And so then our perception of like actually being able to get it done just slips. So
yeah.
good. Yeah,
Yeah,
amazing.
I mean, this is also the quote that we got from our old co-founder, and he was always like the juggling the china analogy, and he's like, we're all juggling china. Some of it's Kmart china, and some of it's very, very fancy, expensive china. And if you don't start to actually put down or drop the Kmart china, like it as you may, it's much easier to replace. You're going to start dropping the fancy china because you'll lose control of all of it. And I just feel like if there's one thing people can take from this is, and it's actually something that I've been thinking about after 2 weeks of travel, is like so much stuff dropped, like so many things dropped, and I'm using this as a little bit of a reset and going, what if I don't pick it back up? Or what if I can actually do it less? And being really thoughtful about, rather than spending all my energy panicking about all the stuff I've dropped, spending it going, okay, let's get a list of all those things and figure out what stuff can stay dropped. And that's actually a much better use of the mental space that's been taken up in my brain now.
Yeah, great. Love that, love that. Okay, good, good, good. I wanna end on one, like, very quick little win, and that is, had some lovely comments. We've been out and about and everywhere and had lovely comments of people listening to this podcast and love us, and tune into us each week, and it resulted in someone calling today and asking us to do a couple mini master classes for their organization, which could ultimately lead to Powersuit being embedded. So first of all, I wanna thank people for taking action and going, "Hey, we can have Powersuit in our organizations, in addition to, the membership." So yay to that. So thank you to our gorgeous listeners who take action and pull us in because we'd love to chat to your people, your teams, and you.
Yeah, add that to your plate. Like, doesn't matter. You're never too busy to bring us in.
Put that as a to-do. It has to be done this week. Amazing. Thanks, everyone. Check out powersuit.com. We'll catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.